Welcome back. So I'll be talking about how the current U.S. government is using its knowledge of the history of black uprisings to incite black people to riot today. The historical blueprint that the U.S. government is referencing are the racial uprisings that occurred in the summer of 1967, or Long Hot Summer as it was called. In the summer of 1967, the worst of the racial uprisings occurred during a 2-week period in Newark, New Jersey, then Detroit, Michigan. There were about 167 of these black uprisings across the U.S. in total. First, I'll read an interview conducted by staff at the National Public Radio, NPR, the same one that is defunded by this government, and it's with a Columbia professor, Jelani Cobbs. Reading directly from the website, NPR's Michelle Martin talks to Jelani Cobb about the race riots of 1967 and political unrest today. He co-produced a documentary for the American Experience series airing on PBS. This is an old post, of course. Michelle Martin hosts. You're old enough to remember it's a summer you'll never forget, 1967, when cities around the country went up in flames. And so then Michelle Martin gives this soundbite from Lyndon B. Johnson. We have endured a week such as no nation should live through, a time of violence and tragedy. For a few minutes tonight, I'll talk about that tragedy. Yeah, you've endured a week. Meanwhile, black people have endured centuries of oppression in this country, but you couldn't stand the fire for 1 week. Good luck. Martin. In response, President Lyndon Johnson appointed what became known as the Kerner Commission to take a deep look at what happened and why, and now writer and educator Jelani Cobb is taking a new look at that report and the summer that sparked it. He is the co-producer and co-writer of a new PBS documentary. It's called The Riot Report, and he's here with us now to tell us more about it. Dean Cobb, thank you so much for joining us. Jelani Cobb, thank you for having me. Martin, I want to go back to 1967 because I think that many people forget just how many riots or uprising, whatever you want to call it, how much civil disorder there was that summer. So would you set the scene for us? Like, what was it like? So I'm going to pause here and address his comment about riots or uprising, whatever you call it, as if it's irrelevant. Whatever you call it is very important. If you call it a riot, you mean people are behaving out of order and doing something that they should not be doing. If you call it an uprising, it means that people are oppressed and they're reacting in an appropriate manner to get rid of their oppressors. What do you call it? Cobb says, so this had begun really even before 1967. You know what's happened in 1965, and then there were uprisings in New Jersey and Ohio in 1966, and then 1967 was the kind of first of what they refer to as the long hot summer, and it was clear that the country was heading toward a kind of crisis point as it related to what was happening in American cities. This was the dawn of deindustrialization, economic stagnation, high unemployment, the demise of education. I'm pausing here to show you, when I say it's a blueprint that's being replicated, here we go. Deindustrialization, the point about getting these jobs, that factory jobs and mining jobs, we have become deindustrialized. That's already there, and it's worsening. The economic stagnation was made by the current government by introducing tariffs and having a chaotic government led by an idiot. Then there's the high employment, which is caused by the chaotic, idiotic governance that we're having, and the demise of education is defunding it by this government and removing the Board of Education. So they're deliberately recreating the conditions that existed when those riots occurred. And so by the summer of 1967, it was clear that something had to be done. And in the midst of this, Lyndon B. Johnson, the president, called together what came to be known as the Kerner Commission to examine the roots of what they called civil unrest or civil disorders, and what could be done to prevent them from happening, in Johnson's words, again and again and again. Martin, One of the points that you make in the documentary is that this report rocked people's worlds. This is from a news program from March 3rd, 1968. Harry Reasoner, the reporter. This is Harry Reasoner. For the last days, this country has lived on the indictment, a charge of white racism, national in scale, terrible in its effects. They've been living under that charge since the moment you enslaved people, since the moment you stole people's land. It didn't happen that day. It was coming. It was building, Martin, this is the famous phrase from the report, that this nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Why was this so shocking for people to learn? Yeah, why was it so shocking in a segregated society, in an oppressive society built on oppression and racialized oppression? Why was that shocking, Cobb? They went back and forth on language. They thought that it was crucial that they highlight that the problems that the people were seeing, the conflagration that they were breaking out in American cities, were the direct product of deliberate, intentional policy decisions that had been discriminatory in their nature. And that was, I think, hearing that from a government source was shocking to people then and really now. And we see those intentional, discriminatory practices and policies implemented when a government of the U.S. comes to power and removes over 300,000 black people and other people because of their race, gender, ethnicity. These are racialized policies meant to harm people and meant to create chaos. Martin, one of the points that you make is that a lot of news coverage of the time just did not prepare people to hear this, and this is where I want to play a clip. Unidentified reporter. The burning and looting, the shooting and beating went on for nearly a week. In the background is a long chronicle of defeat and disappointment, of discrimination and Negro grievances, of pure hate for the white man. If you create a society based on hating people, on stealing people's lands, on committing genocide, cultural and physical, of stealing the labor of people, dismantling their culture, family, language, is this love fest that you are building? What did you sow in hate and you expected to reap in love? Moving on, Martin, as a person who's now, you are the dean of the School of Journalism at Columbia, which means you're a part of shaping future generations of journalists. I have to ask you, what was it like for you to receive that, Cobb? One of the things that's notable is that the reporters, the journalists who cover these stories are almost uniformly white and male. And they say that, the coverage of the problem exemplifies the problem. Now, of course, the other part is that, it didn't mean that you had to color coordinate coverage. What it did mean, the big problem there was as much in terms of their attitudes and the approach they took to covering these communities was often snide or glib. So we have the media problem. You defund NPR, which gives balanced news reporting that takes in diverse voices, and you leave us with only the white media, such as Fox, not really media, just entertainers who blow smoke up the foolish presidents. But that's what we have now. So yeah, they're snide and glib there too. So I'm telling you, they're using the blueprint because evil is not smart. It just repeats the same nonsense generation after generation. Martin, say more about what you think the legacy of the commission was. Cobb, I mean, there's a tragedy in that the report was really orphaned, left. When it emerged, Lyndon B. Johnson wanted nothing to do with it. He recognized how politically explosive it could be to say that the problem happening in American cities were the product of white racism. As a consequence, the very many suggestions that it makes around housing, around police reform, around employment, around education, the comprehensive approach that it took to looking at what was happening in the American city was never really enacted. And it just those ideas just kind of died on the vine. So they put out these research, and they want the research to come back saying that what is wrong in America are the black people, are the brown people, instead of what is wrong and continues to be wrong in America is white racism and the insistence on white supremacy and not sharing and not living inequality as the Constitution and all the words they say seem to call for us to do. So they don't want the truth. Martin, I wonder if here there's a kind of cautionary tale there for other leaders now that you think about it, Cobb. I think the cautionary tale is that if you appoint a commission to avoid solving a problem, that commission may actually force your hand in terms of addressing that problem. It doesn't happen all the time, but that is a possibility. And I think the Kerner Commission, and I shouldn't say that, Johnson hadn't, because of course, the war on poverty and the civil rights legislation that he signed, those were significant acts, but on the specific problem of what was happening in the American cities, the Kerner Commission report really kind of, painted him in a corner in some ways, because it said, dude, you and your people are the problem. You have to fix you, and that's not what they wanted to hear. Martin, obviously, you've been working on this for quite some time, but it emerges as a moment when there's another mass movement emerging in response to the situation in Gaza. You've had a front row seat to it as Dean of Journalism Program at Columbia. So I'm wondering if you see some connections there, given your very sort of unique vantage point, Cobb. So I don't want to be too elastic because the Kerner Commission was looking at a very specific problem, rooted in a very, very particular American history. But I do think that, it's notable that kind of contextually, it's emerged almost in dialogue with the discord around Vietnam, and other kinds of discords were emerging, from American foreign policy. So that it's not all that surprising, I think, for me to see the great deal of criticism and anger and activism that has been the outpouring that we've seen on American college campuses, At a point in time where we're thinking about this other problem, I think that those things tend to go hand in hand in some way. The history of things, the what you sow in the world will come back and you will reap it sort of thing. He is not saying that, I am saying that, So that is where that ends. So when I'm saying they're using the blueprint, it's very easy to do. They're dismantling whatever gains were gained, civil rights for black people, where affirmative action gave people jobs they were entitled to because white supremacy was blocking them from getting them jobs they qualified for. They've now removed people from their jobs, creating a situation where oppression is real and it's made by our government. This disenfranchisement is made by the government, and they're forcing the people into a situation where they want them to have some kind of uprising in resistance so that they can exert more power, physical power, force against black bodies. Always be aware that they're playing the same playbook. They just change their faces. Thanks for listening.